I have been wanting to do a few more book reviews on my channel for a while, but the thought of sitting down and reviewing a book, essentially just doing a synopsis of it, didn't appeal to me, so I'm going to be doing something a little bit different. I'm going to be reading reviews on Goodreads of a book that I recently finished that I loved, and the book I'm going to be featuring in this video is Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmus. I'm anticipating that there are going to be spoilers in this review, so if you haven't read the book already and it's something that you want to read, I'd recommend reading it first and then coming back to watch this review. I'm going to start off by giving you my overall impression of this book before jumping into Goodreads. I mentioned at the top of this video that I loved this book, and I was really surprised by it because I didn't know anything about this book when I went into it. I decided to read this book because it was recommended on a list of book recommendations by Enneagram type. I don't want to go too far off tangent, so I'm not going to explain that too much further, but that is how this book came into my life. I would have never picked up this book on my own. The main reason being that I thought this was a romance, and I'm not generally into romance novels. I like to read books without knowing anything about them besides the overall genre. So this is categorized as historical fiction, I believe, but when we jump into Goodreads, we'll see a little bit more about that. I was so pleasantly surprised by this book because it was really quirky and funny. There are some darker and heavier themes in this book though, themes like sexism, misogyny, essay, and religion. That's something that isn't really reflected well in the cover. This cover gives off a lot of chick lit vibes, and I wasn't expecting those heavier themes, but even still, I really enjoyed this book. That is my overall impression, but as we go through the reviews, I'm sure more of my thoughts will come out, and I'm hoping that reading the reviews and using those as prompts will generate a more dynamic and lively discussion, even though it's still just me talking to a camera. The last thing I want to say before I jump into Goodreads is my overall rating for this book. I want to have that in mind before I start looking at the reviews. I think for this book, I would give it a solid 4.5. I think in Goodreads, it doesn't allow you to do 0.5, similar to how I would be very hesitant to give out a 1-star review. I'm also very stingy with 5-star reviews, so I'm going to settle on a 4, but my genuine score for this book is 4.5. Here we are on the Goodreads website, and I'm just going to type in the name of the book. I'm not going to sign in. Here's the book. The cover looks really different here. I like this cover a lot more. The aggregated star review for this book is 4.28, so that's very much in line with how I feel about the book. Jumping to the filters, I'm going to go newest first. Reviews of all editions is fine, and I'm going to choose reviews that are in English. When I initially conceived of this video, I thought I would start with the 1-star reviews first, but I've changed my mind now that I'm recording. I want to start with 5 stars, and I'm thinking I'll read maybe 2 or 3 reviews in each category, depending on how long they are. Let's start with 5 stars. This was a fantastic read. It's no secret that women had bigger challenges and fewer opportunities in the 60s. This book gives a first-hand account of a particularly strong woman who bulldozed her way past those challenges to pursue the life she wanted. With plenty of drama, humor, and colorful narration, Lessons in Chemistry is sure to keep you turning pages. So from this review, you can tell that this book was set in the 60s, which is why it's categorized as historical fiction. The genres listed for this book are here, and historical fiction, feminism, humor. Back to Christie's review. So the particularly strong woman in this book is Elizabeth Zott, and I loved her character. I also loved how her daughter and her dog were written. I couldn't get enough of those characters. That definitely kept me wanting to read more just because I loved these characters so much. So I'm really liking how this is going so far, but that's probably because I agree with this first review. Let's scroll down and see another one. Okay, so here's a short review by Meisha and another 5-star review. really funny and heartwarming read. Overall, I do agree with this. I found this book really funny and I chuckled at a lot of parts. I found it very, very entertaining, but I do want to underscore that there are some dark themes in this book, some things that could be potentially triggering. So it's not all funny all the way through, but I feel like the humor balanced the dark and serious themes quite well. So I do agree with this very short review. Okay, let's do one more since that one was pretty short. Oh, this one might be long. I'm gonna see how long. Okay, it's not too long. Emily Potter, 5 stars. Yes, loved. I think every man should read this book. Elizabeth as a character is wholly unrelatable, but as a woman, completely relatable. My mom and I had a big discussion about whether the fairy tale elements take away from the political points she is trying to make, but I think fairy tales have always contained a moral message, and this is no different. Easily readable, powerful, magical. Okay, there's a lot of meat to this review, even though it is a shorter review. I definitely agree that Elizabeth as a character is a character. She's not a real person. This is fiction. So there are going to be a lot of things about her that aren't relatable. She's probably not someone we would meet in real life, although who knows, there are 8 billion people in this world, but I do see where this reviewer is coming from and where the reviewer says, as a woman, completely relatable. I think that speaks to the sexism and misogyny and just the experience of being a woman in the world that we live in. In terms of the fairy tale elements, I would say that a lot of things do fall into place very nicely. Of course, the main character does have setbacks and things that she needs to overcome, but this book does have a happy ending and everything kind of falls into place. So I would again agree with the reviewer here that the fairy tale elements don't take away from the political points. All right, those are the 3 5-star reviews that I'm going to be reading and reacting to today. Let's go to 4 stars. This review is short and sweet, girl power. This is a book with a lot of feminist themes, so there's not much more to say about that. Hillary was between a 3.5 and 4 for this one. Loved the female empowerment theme, but wasn't huge on the ending. The whole 6:30 storyline was a bit silly, but I liked it. 6:30 is Elizabeth Zott's dog, and I loved this character so much. I love stories that are written from an animal's perspective, and 6:30 was such a clever, fun, and heartwarming character. Probably my favorite character of the entire book. So that's what Hillary is referring to in this review. In terms of the ending, I would say it was okay for me. I liked that it ended on a hopeful and positive note. It was one of those endings that wraps up all of the loose ends in a neat little package, and I personally find that very satisfying. The one thing I thought was lacking, I really wish the so-called fairy godmother could have met Mad Zott, Elizabeth Zott's daughter, and also the fairy godmother's grandchild. Even the first glimpse into that meeting, or a glimpse that that meeting was about to happen, that would have made me feel very satisfied. And this is bringing up another emotion that I felt when I was reading this book. I was moved to tears in several sections. I don't really cry, so the tears didn't come out, but I definitely teared up. These weren't really sad tears. It was when something good happened and I just felt so emotional about it that my eyes would just well up in tears. The last 4-star review I'm going to read, these are all very short, so it's working out quite well for this video. Emily gave it 4 stars. I wish the dog had more narration airtime. I wholeheartedly agree. 6:30 again was my favorite character. Now let's jump to 3 stars. Here's a review from Brett. It was fine and fun, but you really can't take it too seriously. If you want to read about women scientists overcoming challenges, this isn't the one. It's a little too silly for that. Okay, I think this review is quite fair. I'm not a scientist. I haven't read a lot of books about women scientists overcoming challenges, so I can't speak to whether this book is too silly for that or whether it's an accurate depiction. I feel like this book gives gives some of the flavor of a woman being in a male-dominated industry, especially back in the 60s when there was a lot of sexism and misogyny. Not that there isn't now, but maybe it was more blatant and apparent back then. And again, this book is fiction, so there are a lot of liberties taken, I'm sure. So this might not be representative of women scientists and the challenges that they actually face in real life. So maybe a nonfiction book would be better for that, but I still really enjoyed this book, and I thought the underlying themes came out really nicely. Jasmine also gave it 3 stars. Let me see how long this is. Okay, this one's quite long. I might move on to 2 stars after this. The book is about a woman in the 60s struggling to find her place as a scientist in a society where women were meant to stay at home and do as they were told to. But Elizabeth Zott does not accept the rules imposed by men, and even in the hardest moments stands up for herself and her own aspirations. That is a very good summary. I liked the premise, but I feel like the book didn't do the character or women justice for 2 reasons. 1, Elizabeth Zott is obviously an educated and intelligent woman with a clear understanding of the society's problems. She understands that she's living in an unjust patriarchy where women are worth less. She even has conversations with other women about this topic. She knows that she's being treated unfairly. At the same time, she is depicted again and again as a naive woman who doesn't understand why people are unfair to her or why people don't share her worldview. There are so many scenes where she is oblivious to the bad treatment that she's receiving, or where she literally does not understand why people are unhappy about her lifestyle. Sometimes it feels like she succeeded at her goals, not because she was a strong woman who defied all obstacles, but because she didn't even notice the obstacles in the first place. The lesson seems to be nothing is holding you back from your dreams, only yourself. And personally, I find that a very unfair message to women who have in fact been held back by matters outside of their own control. Okay, this is a really interesting take. I definitely agree that there are barriers that are outside of a person's control. So for example, keeping on the theme of the book, there was a lot of sexism in science, a lot of people taking credit for Elizabeth Zott's work. And of course, if we extend that to the actual world that we live in, there's a lot of systemic racism that is definitely outside of a person's control. So I can see where the reviewer is coming from here. I don't know if I remember a lot of instances where Elizabeth Zott felt like a very naive person. She definitely was firm in her beliefs. One example of this is she's an atheist, so she has very different views of religion than her community, and a part of her didn't understand why society would care so much about her religious views. And I kind of relate to that because I have a lot of views, the way I live my own life, that are different from a lot of the people I know. So for example, I don't have kids. I've never really wanted to have kids. So that is a choice that I've made that I don't really understand why people would judge that. It's hard for me to understand why people would pressure me, for example, to have children when I very clearly don't want them. So I viewed Elizabeth Zott similar to that, where she knows who she is and she really doesn't understand why people would judge her for it or would care so deeply about her views. I think she did understand that people don't share her worldview. She knows that most people around her believe in God and are religious. It's just that she doesn't, and she knows that's different. And I don't know if she was oblivious to the bad treatment that she was receiving, but being a woman in that environment, I could see that you might need to put up some walls and not go into battle every single day. Even as a woman living in today's world, there are times where I just don't feel like asserting myself, and that's okay. I think that's part of feminism, to do what's true to you and not be pressured to act a certain way because someone else expects it of you. This is a really, really interesting review. I'm so glad I'm doing this. I think if I had sat down just to do a synopsis, these themes might not have come up, or maybe not so in depth. Okay, let's move on to point number 2. This is a book about a woman, yet the book almost never talks from her perspective. Instead, we read the intimate thoughts of her male partner, the male TV producer, the male journalist, the male boss, the priest, the reverend, even the dog, but rarely from any woman. I think there was a short piece written from Harriet's perspective, and then very few from Zot's perspective. That's about it. Where are the women in this book? I'm trying to think back because I finished the book maybe about a week ago. This book does jump around a lot in terms of getting glimpses into other people's perspectives. And also the timeline jumps around a lot. But I did feel like this book had a lot of perspective from Elizabeth Zott, the main character, and also her daughter, Mad Zott, and definitely Harriet, who is her neighbor and friend. I'd have to read the book again, but for me, just reacting to this review, I do feel like I got a lot of Elizabeth Zott's perspective. So I'm not sure about this point, but I do agree that there are a lot of different perspectives that come up in this book. The last part of this review is I think the book was entertaining enough and you'll have some fun with it, but don't expect this book to be a life changer. That's fair. I would agree with that. Let's move to 2 stars. I'm getting a little nervous. I'm like sweating right now. This is such a beloved book for me. I'm scared to read these reviews. Okay. Jennifer gave it 2 stars. I thought the story was fine, but I couldn't get past the 4-year-old reading Tolstoy or something, the super intelligent dog, and Elizabeth's absolute failure to pick up on any social cues. God forbid someone of importance be average intelligence. Also, this annoyed me that for its super modern stance on women and supposedly pro-women in science nature, the smart female still had to fall into the hopelessly socially awkward stereotype, as did the precocious daughter. Oh, but make sure we know she's also hot. She wasn't relatable. There are a lot of thoughts that came up for me as I was reading this. I do, admittedly, love books about smart people. And this kind of relates to the Enneagram type that this book was recommended for. Now, I am an Enneagram 9 on most days when I do the tests, but I also test very highly in 5. And 5 is the investigator, the knowledge seeker, basically someone who really loves intellectual pursuits. I do love the super intelligent person or being trope. I eat that up. So having this really smart main character, really smart child, yes, 4 years old and reading literary fiction, and this really smart dog. These were my 3 favorite characters, as I mentioned. So I think that might just be a taste thing in terms of fiction. I don't really read fiction for realism because I read so much nonfiction. When I read fiction, I'm really looking for a form of escapism. I want my imagination to be lit up. That's why I read so much sci-fi, dystopian stuff. So for me, realism is not a criteria in fiction. I am more than willing to suspend my disbelief. So a smart person falling into socially awkward stereotypes is quite realistic and believable for me. That a really smart person, a brilliant person, could lack in other areas like their social adaptiveness, say. I think we're just on like very different wavelengths in terms of what types of books we like. Let's go to Catherine's review. This book could have been so much better. It was poorly written. The main character was arrogant, pretentious, and rude. We were given way too much info on the neighbor's husband. The kid was very obnoxious to the point she was unbelievable. The only 2 positives: the science was accurate and the dog was cute. There are definitely way better books out there than this. Okay, I think that is also a matter of taste. I didn't find the book to be poorly written. I found it a really easy read. Is it literary fiction? No, but I didn't find anything distracting about the writing. I didn't think it was poorly written at all. I didn't find the main character to be arrogant, pretentious, maybe rude in a few places, but I really love the main character, so I think maybe the main character just rubbed this reviewer the wrong way. Too much info on the neighbor's husband. Yeah, that's a periphery character. I didn't really need to know too much about him. The kid was very obnoxious. Okay, the kid is not believable. We've already talked about that, but I loved Mad Zott. She's probably my second favorite character after 630, and then Elizabeth Zott, maybe my third favorite character. So I don't know. I loved Mad Zott. The science being accurate, I don't know too much about that, but I did look up some terms and learned a few things, but they've gone out of my head now. And the dog was cute. Yes, definitely. Okay, very interesting. These haven't been too bad so far. Let's do one more 2-star from Natasha. I like the idea of the book, but it's riddled with cliches and cartoonish characters. I didn't get the hype. Yeah, there are definitely characters in this book, as I mentioned. This is fiction. I didn't view them as cartoonish, maybe a little bit more extreme than the average person. But again, with 8 billion people on the planet, these people could actually exist out there somewhere, these characteristics. So I don't know about that part. In terms of cliches, I didn't really get that from this book. I'm trying to think back on whether there were any cliches that jumped out at me. Don't think so, but if there were some examples, I could definitely react to this a bit more. But as it stands now, I just think these reviews they're just people who didn't like the book, and I really love the book, so it's just like a totally different take. I respect these reviews. I mean, everyone is entitled to their opinion. Okay, let's move on to the 1-star reviews. Oh my gosh. Okay, here we go. Lisa gave this book 1 star. This book needs a trigger warning. I couldn't get past the first quarter of the book before having to quit. Trigger warnings are sexual assault, animal cruelty, sexism, and gaslighting. Yes. So I did mention that there is SA in this book. Animal cruelty. I'm trying to think of what happened at the beginning of this book. It could be 630's backstory. That's the only thing I can think of, and usually I am very sensitive as well to animal cruelty. Definitely sexism, misogyny, gaslighting. Yes, this is a very fair review. I did mention at the beginning of this video that this book does have a lot of themes that could be potentially triggering. I'm trying to look at the blurb at the back, and I don't think there is anything that would suggest that this book would be triggering, and the cover, which we briefly talked about, doesn't look like a book that would be remotely triggering. Because I don't read anything about the book before I start reading it, I don't really notice trigger warnings, or I don't seek them out, but I could definitely see that this book could be triggering, and maybe that does need to be somewhere. The next review, Veronica gave it 1 star. This book was really hard to finish, never really got exciting. For this review, I'm really getting a difference in like personal preference, because for me, it was really easy to finish. I always wanted to read it. I wouldn't say this book is exciting per se, but because I loved the character so much, I really wanted to find out what would happen next. I really enjoyed it, but I get that there are people out there who don't enjoy the things that I enjoy. This is going to be the last review. Is this a long one? Okay, it's not too long. Chemistry is the study of change. Unfortunately, so is closing this book and picking a better one. I wanted a bold feminist story wrapped in scientific brilliance. What I got was a clunky mix of flat characters, forced quirkiness, and a painfully obvious message delivered with all the subtlety of a frying pan to the face. Oh no. Elizabeth Zott is supposed to be a brilliant, misunderstood chemist. Instead, she reads like a walking TED Talk with zero emotional nuance. The side characters are cartoonish, the dialogue often cringy, and the pacing all over the place. There's empowerment here, yes, but it's heavy-handed, overly didactic, and feels like it was written to go viral on Instagram quotes, not to move a reader's soul. Also, every man is evil or stupid, every woman is either oppressed or waiting to be enlightened by the main character's greatness. That's not feminism, that's flat storytelling. Conclusion. If you like your characters two-dimensional and your messages spoon-fed, this one's for you. Otherwise, mix these chemicals with caution. This review is very well written. I enjoyed reading it. I wouldn't say I agree, of course, because I didn't find the characters to be flat or two-dimensional. I thought they were really interesting. They are quirky, and maybe that is forced quirkiness. I don't know. I mean, someone wrote this book with the intention that these characters would be this way. And in terms of the message being obvious, I would say that's true. And I'm okay with that. I guess I look for different things in fiction. As I mentioned, I really read fiction for escapism. I don't really want to be using my brain that much and deciphering messages in fiction. I'd rather use my brain for nonfiction, for creativity, for self-reflection. So really, fiction is a way for me to turn off my brain in a sense. So I don't mind the obvious message. This book did make me think about a lot of the underlying themes. This is the second review that's talked about the characters being cartoonish. So that's really interesting to me. Maybe they are cartoonish, but I certainly didn't mind that. Dialogue being cringy. I didn't get the cringe with this book, and the pacing being all over the place. It does jump around a lot. The also part is interesting to me because it says every man is evil or stupid. I definitely did not get that from this book. There are a lot of male characters in this book. I can think of maybe 2 or 3 male characters who were written as antagonists, but I felt like the other characters were fine. The characters that I'm thinking of specifically are Reverend Wakely, Dr. Mason, Walter Pine, Calvin, who was Elizabeth Zott's partner. There was also the security guard. So these are all male characters in this book who I think had a bit more dimension to them, where they are in this pot of sexism. The book is set in the 60s, so that was the environment. But I also felt like they had a bit more nuance to them. They were more open-minded, and they were also quite supportive of Elizabeth Zott. There was also Mr. Wilson, who was portrayed as a regular male character, maybe pretty average, not evil or stupid, but there are definitely points in this review that are fair points. I also don't think every woman is waiting to be enlightened by the main character's greatness. I do feel like every woman was oppressed because that was the time that they were in. But as I'm thinking about this, aren't we all in this pot until we're shown a different way? So if I was a woman in the 60s and I was just going along with my day, going along with society, and I meet someone who is very different, who has different views of the world, very feminist views, I think that would open up my mind. So aren't we all waiting to be enlightened by someone who is more enlightened than us? I don't know. Very interesting review. I think this is a good place to end off this review. And after reacting to the most recent reviews on Goodreads, I would say that I still feel like this book is a 4.5 to me. This was so much fun. I definitely want to do more reviews in this manner. It was just so interesting to go through and see what other people thought of this book rather than me just doing a monologue. I just found this a lot of fun and very good for my brain. I feel very activated right now in terms of my energy level and my desire to record more of these reviews. That is going to be it for today. If you've read Lessons in Chemistry, I'd love to know what you thought of the book. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll be back soon with another video. Until then, please take care and bye for now.